And then they
Okay,
start.
I'd like to welcome everybody today to welcome everybody today to East Dundee's Committee of the Whole meeting dated Monday, June 3rd, 2024 at 6 o'clock. Catherine, will you take the roll?
Trustee Mahoney.
Here.
Trustee Coonsey.
Present.
Trustee Britton.
Here.
Trustee Saviano's not here. Trustee Triber.
Here.
Trustee Sauter.
Here.
And President Lina.
Here. Okay, and then it's going to take us to public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who'd like to address the board on an agenda item? We have two, or actually, it doesn't have to be an agenda item, whatever's on your mind. Seeing none? No? Okay, well, we'll just continue on right then with our agenda items. The first one then is just going to be a continued discussion regarding regulating food trucks. I've had a discussion on this with Erica. Dan Hart at our last meeting had made a point that Woodstock held a festival of just food trucks, which seems to be a workable compromise, it seems. I personally feel as though if we make these things a regular feature in our downtown, which I don't think is a good idea, the novelty is certainly going to wear off, and I think the draw that everyone is hoping for will probably fizzle out. Whereas if we were to hold something like what Woodstock has done with an event featuring these things once or twice a year, that'll certainly have that draw that I think we're all looking for. So with that, I will open it up to the board and find out what anybody else has as far as ideas or comments. Andy, you want to start us? Do you have anything?
Sure. I like the idea of having events where we feature food trucks. I think it would be a nice attraction to pull people into the town. The Motor Monday event that was mentioned in the packet seems like a great fit, especially mobile food trucks and cars. I do think that it doesn't address the requests that we had from local businesses, two different businesses asking for food trucks. I think we could go a little farther and allow a way for them to use food trucks in complementary ways, not competing ways, by finding, like we do have a growing culinary food district, and if we find spots that are gaps in that and people can come to the area for things that we currently don't have, say, for example, a ramen food truck shows up, and that's going to draw people who are following that ramen truck. In the case of, like, if my wife and I were going, I would get something there, and then she'd say, I don't want ramen and I don't want beer. We're going somewhere else to get pasta and wine after. So I think it's going to spill over at that moment, but it's also an awareness campaign. Like, even if you come to town, see this area, and you've never been here before, you're going to see other things and come back. So I don't feel like it's competing. And using a couple parking spaces, they are for the public use. So if there's not many used, and it is something that the community has said in a survey that they all do want to see food trucks, or 70%, the majority of people wanted to see food trucks in the town. So I feel like using a public space for a public use is not a crazy thing to consider. So that's where I'm at so far. I'll pass it on to someone else.
Okay. Rich, you want to weigh in?
I don't see the need for food trucks in its current state. All the events that we have, I mean, I think our restaurants and, even Black and Gray, when they come out, everybody does a fantastic job, and they all work together. In the current state, I don't see a need to change it. Even if it's just for one, I think that there's more than enough opportunity for everybody in the room, as well as other businesses in our community, to step up rather than inviting outsiders in. So that's my 2 cents.
Scott, anything?
Well, I am good with the plan that's outlined for Motor Mondays. I did note that on Thirsty Thursday last week we had a food truck here. That was interesting. Anybody?
The ice.
What's that?
It was for the kids.
It's for the kids.
It was the Italian ice for the kids.
Yeah.
And was it
but,
And you
you know,
cleared it
that's
with-
cool.
with Dairy Queen previously. It
What's
should
that?
be noted that Catherine had spoken with Dairy Queen, which could be somewhat of an overlapping,
Yeah.
competing business, and Dairy Queen was fine with it
Okay.
for the event.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like it was a big hit. I mean, actually, Thursday was a big hit. Nice job. Catherine, huge crowd. You know, I think that I'm fine with taking it slow. If we want to start with just having a couple events on Motor Mondays, then let's do that and see how that goes. See if anybody finds it extremely objectionable, then we'll reassess. But I think that's a perfectly fine way to start things off.
Kathleen?
I'm fine with stepping things out slowly. I don't think the plan or kind of what the summary is here with doing a couple events, which, by the way, the Woodstock event was on Saturday, this last Saturday afternoon. I don't know if it went on or not. They were starting to set up when I was there for the farmer's market. And but I don't think it negates the need for an underlying ordinance by which any food truck, whether it's in a food truck specific event or on singular specific events, we need to have that there, because our current one and our previous one that has now gone away, or previous one that went away, is outdated. There's been a ton of work put into it to comply with the fire department's more recent. It's simplified it for anybody coming into town as well. So that's what I got.
Okay, Sarah?
I'm going to back all the way back up. Caleb, thank you for this beautiful packet. There was so much information in here, I couldn't deal with it. And Franco, thank you for setting up a meeting with some of our local restaurant owners to try to kind of get a compromise for this year to see what makes sense for us right now and where we might go in the future. I think that was a huge help. I know Scott and I were both on that with some of the business owners, and I think we came up with this pretty reasonable compromise for this year to see what to see where it goes. We may have no interest from food trucks; they may not come. But I do really like the idea of Motor Mondays. I do also like the idea of a big food truck picnic. I attended one in Austin years ago, and it was fantastic. To Kathleen's point, I do still believe that the ordinance work, the work that went into the ordinance is actually to even go as far as defining what a food truck is and what we're going to allow in the town and what the application will look like and all of that nitty-gritty stuff that has to be essentially done in order for them to be legally allowed to have their truck in the village, downtown or anywhere else. I mean, we're talking about food trucks village-wide. It's not just the downtown district. I think that kind of got lost a little bit in the last conversation. The ordinance is for food trucks anywhere in town to make sure that they are going through the compliance checks, that, you know, staff is aware of what they're doing, that the fire department's aware of what they're doing, you know, all of that. So I think it's a twofer. I think we've got a really reasonable compromise on paper for this year that we can see how it goes, expand on it, not expand on it, you know, for next year, but that the ordinance itself also needs the ordinance, and then the food truck application is almost a separate entity, because that doesn't just apply to downtown, right? Like, that's for any food truck that comes into town and anywhere in town, so that we've got kind of our regulations around it and all of that. So separate things. One is food trucks for the downtown area. I think we've got a good compromise in what's presented in the packet for the remainder of 2024. And then separately, we've got the ordinances and the application and all of that stuff so that we don't have contradicting information in our code anymore. So,
So it's almost, if I can expand on what you just said a little bit, it's almost as if this whole compromise that was reached by Scott and Sarah and the other restaurants is more the policy of how we're implementing the food trucks for this year and for next year, as opposed to something that needs to be it doesn't need to be an ordinance. This is the policy of how the staff would accept applications within the parameters that are set forth. Does that make sense?
We could treat the application like a part of the pilot program, the Motor Mondays, where it's not really set in stone, but you
Right.
can make it as a one-year pilot program for Motor Mondays.
Okay.
okay.
Okay, we are well represented by our establishments, restaurants in our downtown, so I'm going to reopen up the opportunity to address the board if anybody would like to. I mean, this compromise that the board members have mentioned, I'm assuming, since there are no hands being raised, that everyone is good with this.
Well, I have a question. What are the fees to the food truck?
What are the
What are
what?
their fees to be involved in?
The
Come down
fee?
on Motor Monday.
The fees?
Fees.
Oh,
To the village.
that's to be determined. you
No,
know.
No, it's in the
ordinance.
code.
Well, yeah, I think it's like $50 or whatever, but, to be honest, I'm struggling just with it, and I know you're probably all thinking, here we go again, but we're all talking about this like it's a compulsion, and we have to figure out a way to bring this about. Personally, I don't think, to Andy's point, that there is a complementary synergy, if you will, between our establishments and our food trucks. We really need to support these businesses because these businesses are the ones we live and die on. We don't make a dime on food trucks, and I'm not talking about just dollars and cents here. Even though, yeah, if we were to hold an event that was just food trucks, that would be one thing. I think I can get right with that and get around it. But to bring these things in on a regular basis, I think is really going to, I think it's going to
Frank,
bite us.
to answer Frank's question, if I may, since you didn't decide to do that, it's $300 for a new application fee, and that lasts a year, and it's $75 a day plus a $100 deposit. To
And
answer
it looks like we have a
your
few
question,
business
You're
owners that
welcome.
want to speak.
Yeah.
Joe?
Kind of what Andy said, I don't think we need food trucks here all the time, but I think if we bring food trucks here to get new bodies to the village. I went to a food truck in Soha the other day. On the way home, I stopped at DC Cobb's. My wife wanted to gamble, so they got some business down, right? So it's not that we want to take business from these guys, it's that we want to bring new eyeballs to the village. And not every day. Right?
Do they
Yeah.
have restrictions on, do you have restrictions on what type of food truck can come in?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Non-competing focus
Non-competing.
areas for food, so not a taco truck.
And is there an area that they're going to be able to go?
Have them step to the podium.
Hey,
Is it the same as the original?
I'm sorry, she just reminded
Yeah.
me, can you step to the podium so that we catch everything on the
Is it
magical
same,
microphone?
Is it the same area that was originally posted,
I-
where they can put the food
I
truck?
think based on what's in the packet for this week, and Franco, I'm going to have you correct me if I'm wrong, but the picture shows for Motor Mondays, because the compromise that we had talked about for this year is just for like 2 of the Motor Mondays, and that's just to see what we get in, see if anybody even wants to have a food truck here or anything like that. So it would be on Railroad, there are some parking spaces right by the lumber yard. So they would be off the road so that we wouldn't have to close Railroad, and they'd be parked there. So it would be fairly close to your establishment, but again, it would be non-competing business. It would be a different type. We'd make sure
So
that,
it's just for the 2 events?
yes, for this year.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of a start.
3 more Motor Mondays?
I thought there
How
was
many
a,
Motor Mondays are
One
there?
a month, right?
There's 4.
yeah. I thought that you already had,
We've not had one yet.
No,
oh, okay.
Weather's bad in May.
This is very,
she knows better.
yeah. So
Yeah,
that's,
I'm not sure what the other businesses do on Monday
Mhm.
when that occurs, but like, for example, like even tonight, and throughout, like even walking in the area, the volume that's here on a Monday, like the only reason why we're open Monday is obviously the majority of it is for staffing. We're not getting the support that like is worth it to be open even, like the volume of it. Now, yes, throughout the week, it obviously picks up and business has been great. I think that,
Mhm.
the other businesses that are open all week long can agree with that. So that's where it's difficult, for example, like when the streets are gonna be completely blocked off,
Mhm.
losing that, potentially having someone that's coming here, now they can go to another restaurant that is pulling up just for the event, instead of we're forcing them down to come to Motor Monday, and now they have to walk into one of the restaurants if they want to eat. Otherwise, when they leave, they can go somewhere else.
Mhm.
But for example, now we're giving them a cheaper option to pick something up and not provide to the restaurants in the area.
Can I address that, please?
Definitely.
Mhm.
The people that come to Motor Mondays there's two different kinds of people that come. There's people that want to come and hang out with their buddies and eat at a picnic table, and they are gonna go to the new hot dog guy. Or they're gonna walk down to Dairy Queen and come back. They're not gonna go to your stores. But then there's the other people who park their car and go into your establishment, or go into DC Cobb's, or go someplace else. So I don't know who's gonna come. I don't know. I have no control over who shows up. I set the stage and people come. I think that the food truck is good for Motor Mondays because what we're doing is a hot dog and pretzel truck, and they're gonna be on the north side of the depot. And there's going to be a Kona Ice truck, not selling ice cream, just Kona Ice, and he's the one who'll be down by you and by Duke's. And that's it. So I don't see that as a big imposition on anybody. It's just my opinion.
Thank
You know, I know we had mentioned, Franco said, thanks for setting up the call, Dan and I were on it, and, I think we had a great conversation. Are we still discussing a sunset clause as well? Because I know we mentioned previously, like, hey, we would try it, maybe there's a sunset clause, and then we can reapproach this again in a discussion. And has that discussion gone any further?
Well, this is not actually an ordinance that we're voting on. This is simply a discussion right now, but when it does come up, it's going to be the plan for this year specifically, yes. So it'll be a naturally sunsetting idea of this is what we're going to try this year.
Yeah,
But
because,
it's fair to make sure that there's language to that effect, when we do go through it. I think having the ordinance on the books to go through the process of defining what a food truck is, the application and all that, because I think the biggest concern is with our downtown district, but food trucks happen in this town and other areas, up on 25, places like that. So we still need the I'm sorry, I hate this, I hate having a mask on. We still need the regulations, we still need the application, we still need all of that for food trucks elsewhere. I think the pilot program is specifically for what we do downtown.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
I
worth
think,
putting a little
Dan
bit
couldn't
in.
make it, and I spoke to Joe at Diamond Jim's, our thing is, look, we want to work with everybody. Compromise is, I think, always the best way, but we also want to make sure we're monitoring and we can get some financial data behind this to say, hey, yeah, we did this, here was the impact. And I think that's really where, all of us kind of see our thoughts in terms of, we're making hundreds of $1,000 investments in kitchens. I'm going to start, second kitchen that I want to work on so that I can do pizzas and anything and, for the sub shop. And, so these investments are made with, our belief that, we have the support of you guys as well, and ladies, that, we're helping our businesses. So, I'm fully aware last year, I had many requests to do Motor Monday. We just weren't ready because it was new, but we will be open this year. I made the promise, the commitment is there, but I think, it's just that we are making these investments. And they're substantial. Kitchens aren't cheap. And, I feel that other folks should have to make those investments if they want these food trucks. Because the reality is 80% of our clientele is not from East Dundee. They're not. And they already come here. So, I think that with festivals and these other things, I think that's incredible because that really does attract a lot of folks from outside who are not aware of the area. So, again, I just, reiterate for Colin, who was busy that day, Franco couldn't make the call because he had his baby, but, we all had the same kind of thought process around, look, we want to be, good citizens, want to support the community, but, we expect that to be reciprocated in a positive way. I think that's really what we're looking for. So that's kind of our thing, but thank you for the time.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, anybody else?
I had a follow-up thought. The part that doesn't totally feel right is that we've had two businesses, local businesses, come to us asking for, our clients are asking for this, the community's asking for this. It was 5 years ago when they initially asked for it. So it's been 5 years of delay. And to say that we came up with a compromise is that the answer is no to both of these two local businesses, but the answer is yes, we can put on food trucks in our event. It doesn't feel like a compromise or something that's letting these businesses test it out. I'm okay with supporting our local businesses, but also not handcuffing our local businesses to say we're going to pass laws that limit if you can provide what your customers are asking for or not, that you have to get it from a local business. The same as that we wouldn't, if Black and Gray said, could we require all the restaurants to serve only our beer? That would be an overstep. But saying these other businesses are not allowed to serve any food that doesn't get made here, like Budweiser gets served somewhere else. So them pulling in food very occasionally and non-competingly seems more like a compromise than saying the answer is no, but we can. So that's one reason that I feel like we should expand it a little bit. I do appreciate there's tons of work that went into the ordinances and getting the food truck stuff for Motor Monday figured out, and I like all of that. So it's just asking for a little more, is my opinion.
I have one quick question too. The city, there's a lot of cities around that have do food trucks, but one of the biggest restrictions that they have, for example, so there's a gentleman that owns Double R Barbecue in Hampshire, and one of the things that he knows the restriction is, and that he goes to a lot of cities for, is they have to be a minimum of 150 feet from the closest restaurant. So anyone that serves food. So I think that if we looked at a clause like that, that would definitely help and not hinder you guys from trying to make a specific rule saying, hey, we can only have Chinese food. We don't have Chinese food. You can open up to anyone, but it just has to be out of that demographic. I think that would push them from being in the core of downtown.
Yeah, and I think our original request from Black and Gray was to put it in their back parking lot, not out front. And I think the Distance Social has the back alleyway, so maybe that could be a compromise where people could still get in and out of the businesses, but it won't be a billboard in front of or near other restaurants. I'm open to bringing that to the businesses and see if that's a good compromise.
If I may just inquire, you said 5 years ago this inquiry?
Yeah,
was made by
2019.
businesses, and are we free to ask what those businesses are? Or were?
Yeah, Black and Gray, in the packet you could find their initial request, but it was in 2019.
Correct, and that's what I assumed. So we partner heavily with Black and Gray. Obviously, they do not have a representative in the room currently, but they are a very big part of our business and us of theirs as well. And my understanding, and you can follow up with them on this, though, is that yes, in 2019, they thought that that was something that was going to be a viable asset to their business to allow them to be more sustainable and viable and whatever. Since then, with AJ taking over, Colin coming to town, us opening, they are very much of the opinion that that is not something that is going to be an asset to them. They said that when you guys went through this previously, that by the time they got to it and got to trying to get food trucks to meet the necessary requirements that Dundee set forward, that most of them either no-showed, backed out immediately. I think one guy came and then didn't want to return again because food trucks usually work best at events like Joe was talking about, where you're at a single site that has no other food opportunities, right? Like, if you bring them into this downtown area, assuming they show up, they're just as much as a problem for, we're just as much as a problem for them as they are for us. They're not a individual opportunity to get all of the target audience. Pulling up back there's nowhere else to eat. They come down here, yeah, all these restaurants who are here every single day, providing tax money back into the city, employees of the city are also going to take from them. So, like, we're not really feeding either side of the fence. We're just talking about adding another food option, of which I think we all have diverse enough menus that, like, if it's between ramen, that's the only thing missing, like, one of us will create it.
Well, I mean, this group did, Black and Gray, did request it back then. They tested it. The restrictions we had, they said were way too restrictive, so no one wanted to deal with those. So at the beginning of the last meeting, I asked Teresa if they were still interested. They said they very much were interested in figuring this out, and that she did mention that the food trucks that are too similar to other restaurants were not interested in coming into the town. Like a burger one wouldn't want to come because we're right next to a burger place. But they see it as more of an incubator for ideas that might be an attraction to people coming out to some weird waffle quesadilla or some like strange thing that is like an experimental thing that draws people as an appetizer and then it spills into other areas.
I think that, we are all agreeable on the trial of the two Motor Mondays and allowing these trucks into town, but the idea of anyone setting up a food truck outside of our main parking lot behind it, where you have to park, most people park to then enter our space, is not something that we are going to be comfortable with.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fair.
And I don't think that was the
I
ordinance that we had
I know
previously.
that, but
Yeah,
I'm
that's
just
not in this
saying-
packet. That's
I'm
that's
just
what I'm
saying, as
talking
an
about. Is
idea,
what he's
before
No,
we
for
ever
sure.
get the ball rolling too much forward there,
Yeah.
that's gonna be a really tough hard pass for us.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to accomplish with this year is to reinforce the relationship between places like Black and Gray and TDS with our local restaurants, which Franco has offered to play intermediary, try to come up with menus or make it easy, local delivery service, all that kind of stuff. And then balance that with the fact that we do have a lot of people who really are interested in seeing food trucks in the town. Oops, I'm so sorry. So how can we start that process? How can we look at, some kind of event where we can have a food truck? Maybe it's hot dogs, maybe it's not just hot dogs. Maybe it's something besides hot dogs at one of them, or if any other food truck's even interested in coming to town. It's almost a way to gauge, do we even need a downtown food truck spot, like single spot to have like on a Saturday afternoon, or are literally no food trucks in this area even interested in coming to this town? Like, I don't want to keep wasting. I've spent hours upon hours upon hours of my life looking at this ordinance and going through these rules to try to come up with something, and I just want to see, before I spend hours more, if it's viable, if anybody cares, right? Does it work? Does it affect our businesses or not really? Do we even have food trucks that are interested or not really? Like, is anybody even going to come to this town, or no, are we not going to have anybody show up? Like, that's where I'm kind of at with this, is we've got something for this year. It's not what we wanted. Maybe next year we can look at having a gypsy picnic, a big festival, a big food truck festival, something like that where we can have specific events or things like that to attract this kind of use. But I just want to try it and see where we're at before we keep going down the rabbit hole, I guess. I know that we did the pilot 5 years ago. Let's give it another go. It's post-COVID now, we did the pilot right before COVID hit. It's post-COVID, let's see what we get. If we get a ton of interest and we have to turn people away, then let's look at it next year. But if we get no interest or people who don't show up, then at least we have an ordinance on the books that defines what a food truck is, and we can move on.
It's a baby step.
Yeah,
But,
again, I think we're agreeable with that. But the other thing I was going to say, black and gray in particular, and I'm not sure if you guys want to try it as well, but just 2 Sundays ago, we rolled a flat top onto their patio and cooked smash burgers in their space. Like, I'm sure with requests, Alan would be happy to cook tacos in their space or anyone else's as well. The businesses here have the means to come to those shops and support them also. Well, yeah, exactly. So, I'm just saying there's other opportunities within the room that we can do as well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, and I think the more we see those collaborations working successfully, the more it seems like less of a need. I think before, it could have been seen as not, you guys aren't really incentivized to put on a great food truck situation for a place that you're not getting alcohol sales for any restaurant, not saying you particularly, but there's not as much of a motivation to pull people into Black and Gray's restaurant instead of your own. So I feel like maybe they historically haven't gotten as much consistent and helpful like food service as a food truck who would be 100% focused on it. So I think seeing successful examples of other food going there maybe solves it, and that'd be great to see, just to throw that out.
Okay, great. Was comments done, sir?
I'm just going to veer this off a little bit to the right. Before I start, the fire district has no opinion whether you approve or not approve. It don't matter whatsoever. Our main point is safety. Just to piggyback a little bit on what Trustee Brighton said, there is an area outside the downtown area, and the trucks are already here. And they're unregulated, and they're caught weekend after weekend after weekend. And I'm the only one out there trying to enforce it. This will assist a little bit, so again, whatever you allow it downtown, outside of downtown, whether you allow it or not, it's no variance on us. All I gotta do is change the bottom of my permit and say it's not allowed in these areas, but they are here already. So just drive down 25 any weekend. They're already here. And you guys work, all you guys closely, right? You guys have very hard regulations in your kitchens, your hoods, your systems, your extinguishers, right? Sprinklers. I can't regulate a truck I don't know about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that
they're
you have,
parking
and that you
anywhere.
have the authority to
Absolutely.
regulate. Because we don't
Absolutely.
have an ordinance in place.
Absolutely. They're
Can I ask-
parking anywhere and doing anything they want. The only backing they have is a Kane County health permit, which does not check their electrical and their extinguishers and what they're frying in and where they're parked or how close to a building they're parked. They're in the truck lots. They're on 25. They're by GAT guns. Drive down any weekend, you'll see the red one right outside the auto place across from the firehouse. I'm down there all the time. So they're here. What you guys decide to do with that info is on you. I just wanted to let you know and make you aware. They're already here. Okay.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
We'll
Mark.
definitely
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Okay, well, we got some good information, and we appreciate everyone's input on it.
Franco,
We'll-
do you need anything else from us, or are we okay with? I mean, this was like kind of the discussion in order to have staff direction so that we could do something about this instead of continuing to spin our wheels, so.
Right, well, we've got the minutes, and we'll, when Erica gets back too, we can, further discussion on that as well. So, do you have anything you want to add to this, or comment? No. No? Okay. All right, well, I appreciate it. Like I say, we're going to continue moving on to our next item then on agenda, which is a discussion with Baxter Woodman regarding the lead service line replacement. So would you, Phil, would you like to
I mean,
introduce this one?
it's very exciting if you guys want to stay and
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah,
lead
you sure
service
don't want
lines.
How fast is everyone
How fast
moving?
can they
We talked
run?
about food, I'm like,
I know.
Good evening. So, since our last conversation last June, I'll just touch on a couple of points in my memo, and then Baxter Woodman is here this evening, and they'll talk you through the PowerPoint presentation and some of the recommendations that we have. But since June of last year, we have, with Baxter and Woodman's assistance, we have completed our material service line inventory, although we still have in the hundreds of homes that have not yet completed the survey, so we're still trying to determine the material service types in those homes and businesses, so we're going to continue working on that. And we've also developed and submitted the draft lead service line replacement plan, which has been provided to you in the packet. This evening, we have, or in my memo, and we'll talk a little bit more about it coming up in the PowerPoint, we also have some recommendations. Our next objective is to develop a program for replacing lead services in our community.
Can we close the door? Oh.
No, it's my, so we do have some recommendations, and I've outlined in my memo. The first one is to begin replacing lead services as soon as possible. We do have some dollars included in our current fiscal year budget to do that, and that's $50,000, which, in all intents and purposes, will probably replace close to 3-ish, or perhaps even 4 lead services. We're also recommending that we as the village incur 100% of the cost to replace each lead service from the main to inside each building, and then 3, to utilize low-interest loan funds. And also in my memo, I've mentioned that we are in the process, with Baxter Woodman's assistance, in the process of pursuing low-interest loans, and that process there's different steps along the way, but we have a deadline, if you will, later this late summer, early fall, and then approval in the spring. So the soonest that any loan proceeds, if approved, would be available would be next July of 2025. And so we can talk a little bit more about that. And then we're also working on the water and sewer rate study. And so that could be, once that study is completed, late summer, early fall, some of the items included in the rate study will help us kind of guide a program or a funding option for a replacement plan program. So with us this evening, we have Caitlin Wright is here. Also with Caitlin is Madison Amaral and Carolyn Greaves. So all 3 of them have been helping us with our lead service line program to date, and we'll continue going forward. So, okay, I'll turn it over to Caitlin. Could you?
Yes, please. I can do it by memory.
All right, good evening, everyone. I believe I spoke to most of you last summer regarding lead service lines. So as Phil said, I want to take this opportunity to give you a quick update on the regulations just as they stand, because they are constantly evolving. Talk through what we have presently done with the village to date, and then next steps, and then dig into that financial piece, which is literally the $1,000,000 question that all communities are navigating right now. So first and foremost, let me figure out, there we go. All right. Just some housekeeping items. I like to go through some key terminology that we'll be discussing. So we're going to be constantly talking about community water systems. You're going to hear me reference that throughout the evening. Just for reference, that is an entity that provides water service to at least 15 service connections, or at least an average of 25 people throughout the year. So anyone that's on a local well in town, this does not cover them. So if they've got a well for their property, we're not talking about making this mandate for them. When we're talking about lead water service lines, we are talking about a water service line that some portion of it is made of lead. It can be 5 feet, it can be 50 feet, but some portion of that service line is made of lead, and or it's lead and partially galvanized, and then that entire service line is deemed basically a galvanized service line requiring replacement. Don't get too hung up on that this evening, but just understand we're not necessarily concerned about the length of the lead pipe, but that there is lead in that service line. We'll also be discussing full replacement. So this is where this is new for the industry as a whole. We are talking about replacing a service line from the water main into the home. So we are navigating both public property as well as private property. So in the village of East Dundee, water service lines are split in terms of ownership. It's a shared responsibility between the private property as well as the village. But the law doesn't look at it that way. It is looking at that entire service line being replaced, and it's the village's responsibility to facilitate that full replacement. Any questions on that? Okay, we'll get to those. So we are navigating 3 different regulatory agencies at any given time when it comes to the lead service line mandates. We have a federal component, which is the lead and copper rule revisions, as well as a proposed federal law, which is the lead and copper rule improvements. That's currently proposed. We are expecting that to be finalized in the coming months. I'll touch on the kind of key things that I think may impact the village with that proposed law. We also have the Illinois Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act that's governed underneath IEPA. And then also in the state of Illinois, water service lines technically fall underneath the jurisdiction of the Illinois Department of Public Health. So the reason I bring this up is your public works staff, Phil, Greg, they are navigating 3 different agencies at any given time, and not all 3 of those are coordinating with each other. So our regulations are constantly shifting and changing. So we are responding to what is the most current. What I'll be talking about is most current, but any of this could change moving forward. Underneath those 3 different regulatory agencies and different regulations, there are what I'll call 5 key components that staff are navigating. There's the water service line material inventory that's identifying all service lines in town and what the material they are. There's the lead service line replacement plan. So this is an iteration process. I said that incorrectly, but the first draft was due this past April for that plan. The village is going to have to submit subsequent drafts to the state, with the final being due in 2027. So what you have in front of you is draft 1. We're going to be making revisions to that. We're expecting comments back from IEPA. Through discussions with the board, we might be making changes to it. So this is not final by any means. But it does need to be finalized by 2027. There is requirements for the public education and notification. This is pretty extensive. There's a lot of notices that we'll be sending out to residents with lead service lines throughout this process. As touched on, full lead service line replacements. So the state is looking to the village to facilitate the entire service line if it's deemed lead to be replaced. And there's also changes to lead and copper water sampling procedures. So every community has to sample for lead and copper in their water. They have different frequencies of this depending on any sort of violations that may have happened, but these procedures are changing. Your staff starting next year will have to start sampling in designated homes once every 6 months. So this is going to impact your residents. It's impacting your staff. It's already something that they're doing, but the frequency is going to increase and some of the procedures are changing. So I want to touch on what we've done to date for the village. We have been actively working with Phil and Greg on the water service line material inventory, and I will say the village is in a really good place. You know about 78% of town. So your inventory was due to IEPA April 15th. This is going to be something that's continually built on as we go through this process. There are remaining 332 homes that we don't know the service line material on. So we're continuing to engage with them, send out notifications, request that they participate in the resident survey. We may get to a point where village staff are going to try and schedule maybe in-home inspections or do some other methodology to determine that material. The Inventory submission has passed for April, but we will be subsequently submitting this with the next draft replacement plan in next April. So this isn't going away. It's something that will be an asset the village is maintaining moving forward. In terms of requirements on that public education notification, the inventory needs to be made publicly available. So we've utilized GIS to not only maintain all of the data associated with each service line, but there is a web map. This is on the village's website. For the sake of time this evening, I'm not going to click into it, but if you have questions later on and want me to open it up, we can go ahead and show that. But that map allows any of the residents to go search their address, and they can find out what the village knows and what the village doesn't know. So we can state like very transparently what information we have on their service line material. And then just so that you are aware, your residents did receive a notice just about 2 weeks ago if they had a lead service line or if they continue to have an unknown service line, stating kind of the dangers of lead, ways to reduce lead, and the concerns associated with that. So we will have to continue to send that annually to residents until those lead service lines are removed.
For the map, is it updated already with information?
It is. So I'll call it live. Every time a resident submits a survey, Maddie is actually one of our reviewers. She will go through, review the information they provided. If we feel that it's in a place where we can finalize it, that goes into that live map. There are some that get flagged for additional review, so it might not always be instantaneous, but we are going into that weekly to make sure we're capturing that as regularly as possible.
1491 lit service connections, rather, are those all residential?
Those, it's every service line in town, so that can be business as well.
Okay. Of the 550 that we know are either lead or galvanized and unknown, how many of them are lead connections from the main to the box?
Just public side?
Yes.
I don't know that offhand. Most all of them we assume. So there's no way for us to know just public side unless we're going to excavate. So,
Joe, we got to have records.
no, most communities do not. So,
The only way to really identify that is to look at the service line adjacent to the water main.
yeah, so
Beyond outside the foundation home.
The only way to know that is,
The only way to identify if it's a lead service or not, either we previously knew about it, or look at observe the service line immediately adjacent to the water meter.
well, that'll tell you from the box to the home. I'm more interested from the main to the box, because that should be on the responsibility of the village, because that's village property.
correct.
But when you're talking about how this is going to have to be, well, and it absolutely should be a shared expense between private and public, if the state is compelling every town in the state to replace regardless, are they only holding IEPA loans as the hostage in order to be able to do this, or are they compelling towns to do this in another way?
So this is a gray area that we continue to try and navigate. In terms of most easily available funding, I would say that the Public Water Supply Loan Program through IEPA is where you can get the most consistent large amount of funds for 5 years. I know communities that have looked at doing congressional directed spending. The thing with that is it's annual, right? So you ask for funds each year. You're not guaranteed that. At least through the Public Water Supply Loan Program, you can ask for 5 years of funding. I know other communities that have issued bonds or raised rates to address it as well. So,
Okay,
and
so-
we'll dive into that too.
Okay. Well, and you kind of alluded to the idea that a lot of this is a moving target between now and 2027, 2028, whatever down the road. How do we know that if we take out loans sufficient to cover everything, that the payback or the repayment of those loans is not going to change? And so if we enter into an agreement with a homeowner that says it's going to cost $15,000 to change from the main to your meter, you're on the hook for 12 of it based on the length of that,
Sure.
or however else you want to prorate it. And then down the line, and they begin to pay on this for 2, 3, 5 years, and then all of a sudden the state changes course and says, oh no, this is all on the village, it has to be. Were we gonna end up having to pay all those people back everything that they've already paid in?
So we'll talk through what other communities are doing. I think that there is a lot of public pressure as well as language in that proposed federal law that strongly encourages communities to pay 100%. I don't know that there will ever be anything in law that says you have to use your public funds on private property. I don't know that they can do that. So
It would be like saying you have
Correct.
to change and give everybody in the village a new roof because technology has changed such that we now have safer materials. It's not feasible.
I will say never. I have been on this journey for the past 2 years, and things have, like I said, continually evolved. So I'm not going to say that there isn't. We sat in on kind of a public hearing forum, and there was a lot of feedback throughout that entire day. It was like 10 hours of people weighing in on their opinion, and majority of people weighing in on that to US EPA was communities should pay 100%. Now, whether or not US EPA takes that, I don't know. So
then galvanized, you're saying is being treated the same as lead?
if it's been downstream of a lead service line, so for simple terms, if your public side is lead and the private side is galvanized, that is now deemed a galvanized requiring replacement. So it's downstream. If you think of the direction of the water flowing through that pipe, it's downstream
So the
of.
same should hold for copper, correct?
The reason it does not is the interior of your galvanized is very rough, so it can actually hold lead particulate, essentially creating a lead service line. Copper, plastic, it's smooth, it doesn't do
They'll
that.
just let it go right through to your faucet. So, you know,
Yeah.
I don't mean to be flip about it.
No,
I'm
you're
just
all right.
thinking this is really troubling because when they're going to put these kind of restrictions on any municipality, and similar to a police pension requirements, the numbers aren't there either. And so if you're just going to compound that struggle with this sort of thing, I would like to know what sort of consequences there are for coming up short.
They have not stated yet. I will say that the reason that we're having this conversation is we know lead is bad. We know that consuming lead is bad. There's no argument on that. There's a reason why we do lead and copper sampling. We've been doing that since 1991. So we are constantly checking the water for lead. The best way to remove lead in the water is to remove the source of lead, which is removing that lead service line. So that's where this is stemming from. It is a public safety conversation. But you're completely right. The funding, the money has to come from somewhere. So we'll dive into kind of those recommendations and what other communities are doing. You are not the only village having this conversation right now. That's why we're bringing it to you now and not 6 months out from 2027, so that there is ample time to have conversation.
So when they're talking about this being on the village, I'm curious to know whether or not the costs related to it are, trying to figure out how to best phrase this. I'll come back to you.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I'll keep moving on for the sake of time, but if you remember your question,
Yeah.
please go ahead. Yep.
You had mentioned the nature of lead. We're new to the neighborhood here, 5 months, and I called Gail, who's the Department of Water Department here, as well as West Indies Director of Water. And both of them had said that from the random testing that are done at the faucet in the house, we went below, even all the old houses went below the 800 level. So, I guess my question would be, if that's the case, and secondly, yeah, it's dangerous, maybe it is especially, but if they're doing the testing already, and it's not, at least from my understanding, it's under the threshold, what's the rush, is it all state pressure, or is it more,
I'll repeat the question overarchingly, but that was a wonderful question. So essentially, if they're actively doing testing, and East Dundee as well as West Dundee has seen levels below the limit that is recommended by the state, what is the concern to be pushing this regulation to replace? Is that essentially? Okay. So it does stem federally. This is coming from US EPA. I've heard President Biden speak on it several times. So all states are having to navigate this right now. Illinois just has a law above and beyond what the current federal regulations are. That being said, most communities, including East Dundee, do some sort of corrosion control. This is an addition that's put into the water. Basically, it's a polyphosphate. It coats your pipe and prevents that lead to leach out. So when that's actively being done and it's being done correctly, there is not that immediate concern for lead. But if that lead service line is disturbed, if something happens in the water system, your water parameters change, you now have the potential risk for that lead service line to leach out that lead or pull out that lead into your water. So that's why there's the push. So long as there's a lead service line in the ground, there is still always the potential for that lead to get into the water. But to your point, I have a lead service line. I still drink my water. And I do certain things. I flush my water first thing in the morning. So it's not like I'm not taking those precautions, but I still cook with my water. I still drink my water. I think I'm okay, but
Well,
Yes.
do you mind if I just, to kind of further explain another thing that's kind
Absolutely.
of part of that? Part of the laws, as far as I understand it, I have a lead service line too. So from what I understand as far as the laws are, if you disturb the road where there are lead service lines, then the village by law has to replace them. So all of the potholes we have in town and all of that, like there are certain areas that if we want to fix the roads, we have to by law do the lead service line replacement in those. So there are some street improvement projects that we're trying to balance with lead service line replacement and all of that stuff as well. So that factors into what gets replaced and when it gets replaced. And the roads projects actually also affect the whole lead service line project.
Yeah, now I'll just build on that a little bit. The heavy traffic or anything driving over your road is not disturbing your lead service line. But if there's any sort of excavation that's going on where they have to physically cut into that pipe, that's where we do become immediately concerned. So if there's a water main project or something like that where they're having to disconnect that lead service line, you've now disturbed it, that's the issue. But to your point, we want to make sure that we don't resurface your road and then come back and do a water main project or do this lead service line, and now we've got kind of a patchwork built throughout town. So.
I would assume that increased frequency of testing could help mitigate, especially maybe you test for the road projects, especially in that way that people don't have to be concerned about the
Yeah, the changes in the testing procedures, I think, will definitely give a better sense of what's happening for the water. So,
One question about the testing, is it done randomly? Because we've been in our home 24 years.
so it's a selection process based off of kind of a tiered system that the state's created. That tiered system is actually changing presently. So there is an opportunity for residents, if they have a lead service line, you could probably reach out to Phil or Greg. Yeah, there's no necessarily guarantee because we have to be strategic throughout town where we're selecting it. But if you're interested in participating in that program, I would absolutely reach out to Phil or Greg so that you could get on that list. But it depends on the material of your pipe. So that's the first tier. So.
We're right on water.
Okay. Everything else okay? Good.
I have one question, maybe it's more geared towards Joe, I don't know, it might sound a bit nuts, but is there any way that the existing line from the box to the house could be lined? So in other words, fish, like say a PEX material through it and then just bypass the lead altogether?
It's not allowed in the state of Illinois. So
But it
that
can be
was
done, correct?
it can physically be done, yes, other states have approved it, but IEPA, that went in front of IEPA 2018.
And was
and-
that the plumbers organization that said nil to that?
No, there was just general concern that the theory is if you get a pinhole in that or if that degrades, you still have a lead service line. So you're not solving the problem long term. We kind of investigated that recently, I would say about 6 months ago, and our understanding is IEPA's stance is still the same. They are not entertaining lining as a solution at this time, so.
But, and again, it's a moving target type of situation we're dealing here, 5 years, 3 years, whatever down the line they may. And in the event they do, and we've already incurred $5, $10, $15 million worth of expense, and then they come up with the green light to approve a much, much cheaper solution, where does that leave
Temporary
a town that's
solution,
already
though.
on the hook, you know?
It wouldn't be a permanent one, though.
Why? It could be. I mean, PEX is a proven material, and the idea, which is a good one,
Then you
that there
can go
could be a
down to the state
pinhole.
and lobby for that, but that's not on the books right
Yeah,
now.
I don't know you're correct, it could change, right? But any of this could change. I don't see replacements going away. It's part of the new federal proposed law, which we'll touch on. So I don't think that this is suddenly going to shift drastically where lining is going to be acceptable. In fact, I think it's going to shift the other direction based off of just general conversation under the US EPA umbrella. So.
Well, it just makes it difficult to plan and to go ahead with a plan, knowing that any one of the components of that plan could at any time change.
I would strongly suggest, and I would tell any community this, they should be planning on full replacements happening. And I don't see that going away. That's suggested even stronger in the proposed federal law. It's been stated at the State of the Union by President Biden. Like, there's just a lot of moving parts where that's the direction this is going. I don't think that's going away. Just public relations as well and perception at this point.
Just a question, in the meantime, for those that have lead fibers, I did a test, I went and bought an inexpensive test on Amazon, really good one, and, you know, they're okay. And I was testing our lead water, coming out of the faucet, the water coming through our filter, an RO filter, or assessment system. We tested the water out of the faucet and the water out of the spring, coming out of the hills over here, tested better than my filtered water.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I wouldn't worry about the lead water at this point, personally. That's just my.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I want to touch briefly on the replacement plan. The ultimate goal of this is to facilitate replacements as we've discussed. At this time, we've just identified 222 lead service lines. We are estimating 300 as a part of this plan. How we get to that 300 number is we took that remaining 332 unknowns, looked at the percentage of lead against the known materials that you have, applied that percentage, got to 300. So it wasn't just a shot in the dark. We did do some math behind that number.
Did you base that on where those houses are?
Pardon?
Did you base that on where those houses are, or just generally?
Overarchingly, most of your unknowns are still in the older part of town, so I'm pretty confident that that percentage still is applicable. I've got a map here at the end where you'll be able to see generally where lead is.
How reliable is the idea that lead after 1955 is not an issue?
I would say not reliable. I've got communities that do see lead. We've got a community that's seen lead in the early 60s. Rare, absolutely, but the cutoff date is 86. So that's actually when it became illegal to do that underneath federal law. So the plan underneath Illinois law currently, communities have a tiered rate of replacement depending on the number of lead service lines that you identify. The village falls underneath a rate of 7% for 15 years starting in 2027. That proposed federal law I mentioned earlier, the lead and copper rule improvements, currently as it is written, says that all communities across the United States will have to replace lead service lines in 10 years, starting 2027. So there is the potential that this becomes more aggressive with that federal law. The plan also does an analysis of cost and touches on financing options. We kept this relatively low level in the plan at this time, A, to give the board plenty of time to discuss, because this is getting submitted to the state and it is a public-facing document. We did not want to commit the village to a decision until the board had the opportunity to weigh in on that decision. Underneath the plan as well, there is needs for communities to make a good faith effort to hire diverse contractors. There is no actual requirement. You just need to make sure during the bidding process that we are advertising to DBEs, WBEs, so disadvantaged businesses, women-owned businesses as well. And it discusses kind of the general procedures underneath the law. So that's section, or chapter 5, section 5 in the plan. So if you have questions on what the procedures are, that goes into it in detail in terms of what the law requires for replacement. So big picture, for the sake of time, I want to keep this conversation moving. So I'm going to touch on this, but we're going to keep touching on this. So don't get hung up on this immediately. With that 7% for 15 years, if we take that 300 number that I was talking about, that's roughly 21 lead service lines per year. Right now, we're seeing construction costs range from $12,000 to $15,000 from main into the house. I will say that this is a very volatile number. I know communities that have seen closer to $25,000. I know communities that have seen $8,000. I also suspect that this will increase when we get to 2027, and all communities are having to do this at the same time. Contractor availability, materials, just general supply and demand. But applying that $15,000 number to the 21, some engineering and contingency, the estimated annual cost for that mandated rate is $360,000 per year. If you take that forward across the 15 years, we added a 3% inflation to each year. We're saying it's $8.4 million across 15 years. It's a large impact. Currently, underneath the regulations, there is nothing in the law that requires the village to finance the entire replacement. If you're using state funding, if you're going after a public water supply loan program, the general consensus right now is that you are funding the entire service line. They don't want a homeowner coming back and saying, I can't afford to do this, and the state has given you money to facilitate the replacements. That's not going to be seen well underneath IEPA's eyes. They have, and by they I mean IEPA, for water main replacement projects where you have disturbed a lead service line, you are now issued underneath state law to replace that service line or facilitate the entire replacement because it's been disturbed. We have seen IEPA issue temporary operating permits if you don't get everyone to participate and you're doing a cost share program. So what I mean by that is the village has not paid 100% for it. They've said, okay, homeowner, this is your piece of this replacement. And IEPA goes, well, did they say no because they couldn't afford it? I don't know how we prove that. So they've issued temporary operating permits in the event that that's happened. It depends on the reviewer. This has not been consistent, but just something to be aware of moving forward. What the village has done so far in terms of lead service line replacement. So you guys had the 4th Street Improvement Project. On that project, you disturbed 5 lead service lines. These were businesses. Just the way the B-box and private side and public side played out, the village covered about 80% of that cost. The B-box is right outside the building, so they only had a short way to go to get into the building for that private side. For what I'm going to call homeowner-initiated projects, this is where a homeowner has decided to replace either their lead service line or they're upsizing their service line. There's been 2 so far where the homeowner wanted to replace their lead service line. Village covered their portion, and that's roughly, I'm going to say 40% of the cost. And then there was one where a homeowner was upsizing their service line. In that circumstance, the village did not cover any of the cost. Regardless of what their pipe material was, they were replacing the entire service line because they wanted a larger service line diameter. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's take a step back. I think it's always important to understand what our neighbors are doing. So last year we did a poll across the Chicagoland area. We talked to about 40 different communities. They varied in size. And I would say about 60% of those were doing some sort of cost share program. So by that I mean they were putting some financial responsibility back on that private property owner. The other 40% were doing 100% replacement. It didn't really matter what size community they were. There was no like, okay, well, the really large communities are paying 100%. They've got a little bit more financial buy-in, and the really small ones are doing a cost share program. We didn't see any sort of consistency like that. So taking a more kind of focused group on surrounding areas to East Dundee. Palatine, Deerfield, they do a cost share program right now. Palatine's is 66% of the cost of the private side, so they pay for public side, and then they're covering 66% of the cost of the private side up to $10,000. So they put a cap on what that is. Deerfield is doing similar. They pay for public side, and then they are paying up to 50% of the cost on the private side. Their cap is $6,000. Communities that are paying 100% for replacement: Carpentersville, Elgin, Barrington. These three have gone through the Public Water Supply Loan Program. That's mainly where they've gotten their funds. I would not say it's solely where they've gotten their funds. Algonquin also is paying 100%. They did it through their capital fund. They did not have to raise rates specifically for lead service lines, but they were going through a rate program or raising the rates. But it was not just due to lead service line replacement. Mount Prospect, just a few months ago, approved paying 100%. They're currently doing it through their rates and by issuing a bond. They are looking to go through the Public Water Supply Loan Program as an opportunity as well. So I'll talk on that here momentarily. Things to consider if you're doing a cost share program. How do you get that money back? Do you ask for the property owner in advance to write you a check for their piece? Are you doing some sort of rebate program? So village still covers it at the time of replacement, or excuse me, homeowner covers it at the time of replacement, and then they submit a invoice to the village, and you guys would rebate at your set rate. Is there a payback period? Are you doing something where you're tacking on a flat fee to the water bill? I know communities have looked at doing it to their tax bill. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if you have to do an SSA. You don't want me to do law. But there are communities and there is language in the law that would let you consider that as well. The other thing some communities have looked at is doing more of a deferred loan, and that repayment happens at the time of refinance or sale. Mount Prospect originally had that in play, and they were doing that until they decided to pay 100%.
Regardless of the public-private cost sharing, is it going to affect the ability to get an IEPA loan?
I wouldn't
Because
say...
if they're saying you need to do the whole nut.
So this has become a very gray place as well. What the state is ultimately concerned about is that entire service line gets replaced. I know communities that have, or at WaterCon, IEP was saying they knew communities that had paid out of their capital fund the public side, and they used the loan program to pay for the private side. So they're different pools of money, but they are still paying 100%. IEPA stated at WaterCon, which is, I'm referencing a state conference that we all go to in the water industry. So this is something that we go to learn regulations and such. So IEPA was there. They also stated that they really didn't care so long as that entire service line was replaced. So what wouldn't be appropriate to them is if you were doing a cost share program, you are paying for your portion or some set portion of the private side with that loan, and you've got homeowners saying, no, I can't pay for mine, and you go, okay, state, well, we're not replacing that homeowners because this is only what we're doing. So my recommendation is if you're going through that loan program, plan on paying for the whole thing. So with the IEPA Public Water Supply Loan Program, for lead service line replacements specifically, this is the first time this has ever been offered, they are doing 0% for 30 years. So that's the loan. If you're considered a disadvantaged community, there's the potential to get up to a 40-year payback period and principal forgiveness. I wouldn't say that's going to be incredibly competitive to get, but there is the potential to get principal forgiveness for a portion of that loan. You can request, as I said before, up to 5 years of funding through a project plan. So this is different than that replacement plan. This is a document you submit to IEPA and it says, here are all the projects we're going to do. This is how much it's going to cost. This is how we repay the loan. And then
You all are currently working on that.
we are currently working on that for the village. You can also request for other projects, so other water-related projects. You could do a water tower painting, a water main replacement project. Those will fall underneath a different interest rate. They come from a different pool of money. So, as Phil noted, we are currently pursuing funds through the Public Water Supply Loan Program for the village. We are currently just developing the project plan. This has not gone any further at this point in time. But this gets you in line for those funds if the village so chose to go that direction. I will say that the sooner we get that submitted, the sooner it's approved. It allocates funds for the village for lead service line replacement. You could say last minute, you don't want to use those funds. But if you don't get into the running for the funds, you're not going to be allocated them. Right now, we're seeing that we've heard from IEPA that they are capping the amount from 3 to 4 million for each project year for lead service line replacement. Now, they just came out with the intended use fund for this fiscal year. This is a document that lets us know what they're going to do for this fiscal year. We're in the process of reviewing that. We've seen some discrepancies from that 3 to 4 million, so there's a potential that this could increase, but it varies every single year based off the number of applicants and the funds they have available. If we assumed a 5-year replacement instead of that 15-year, that's 60 lead service lines per year. That's $900,000. With engineering and contingency, we're looking at, call it $1.1 million. That's $5.8 million over 5 years instead of the 8.4 if we're looking at a 3% inflation rate. So there is cost savings at doing this more aggressively. My concern, again, is when we get to 2027, when everyone else is starting to do this, are you going to be able to get contractors to do this, and what is that cost actually going to look like? Most communities are doing this now or starting it as aggressively as they can, sooner rather than later, to get ahead of that mandated rate.
Funding might be tougher too.
Money will most likely be tougher as well.
Is there any component to any of this to indemnify a municipality that gets resistance from a resident? I talked to the president of Carpentersville, and he told me there were 12 people that said, no way.
So it is private property.
Right.
People can say no, right? And if they are saying, no, you can't come onto my property because it's an access issue, there is a waiver developed by the Illinois Department of Public Health that we would want them to sign. If they choose not to sign that, it's still private property, right? You can't force that. So if it's an access issue, that's acceptable in the state's eye. But if it's a financial concern, that's where the state starts to have concerns. They want to see communities do everything they possibly can to work with that homeowner to make sure the lead service line is getting replaced. So that's where the discrepancy changes. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does. I wonder too, and I don't want to complicate it, but subsequent homeowners. So for instance, this whole project gets completed in East Dundee. We end up with a handful of people that don't allow us to do it. What about in 20 years when they sell the home and they either disclose it or not, then the new owner comes back to the village and says, hey, I want it replaced, no more money's available, and the cost is 5 times as much 20 years from now. Where do we stand?
So they haven't said what happens after someone signs an IDPH waiver. There initially was a thought process that, okay, that kind of now falls into the Illinois Department of Public Health's hand, and they'll follow up and maybe try to encourage them. I know communities that have, this is actually happening more in Wisconsin. I think Milwaukee did this. They wrote it into their ordinance where it said, you don't get a choice. You either participate in our program, or we're going to put it into your tax bracket or onto your property taxes. And so no matter what you're paying for your portion, you either pay for it now or you pay for it as part of property taxes over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think that they did that originally. They ended up getting a lot of funding and they now pay 100%, but that was their original plan. So some communities have written it into the ordinance where this has to happen. This is the direction you need to go. So as Phil spoke on earlier, the recommendation right now is that the village pay 100% by going through that public water supply loan program, which we're currently going after. The reason for that is it creates the best chance to meet that need to facilitate full replacement. The other reason behind this is there's a lot of upcoming projects that the village is actively trying to coordinate in infrastructure projects. So we have 2nd Street road improvements expected to be in 2025. On that right now, we have known 4 lead service lines as well as 10 unknowns. I don't want you guys to go resurface that road and then 3 years later, you're forced to start replacing those, and we've now done a patchwork quilt on the new road that you just resurfaced. Same with Barrington Avenue resurfacing. This is a IDOT road or MFT funds?
It's a local road, STP.
STP, thank you. I don't do roads. But this has known 35 lead service lines on it. Unknown 27. So right there combined, we're sitting at our 60 number. That's one road program. Again, that's scheduled for 2027. These are things that we want to start thinking about. This is why we're bringing the conversation now. With that, I know you went very long, so I apologize, but I thank everyone for your time. Are there other questions, discussion? I want to open it back up to having that.
There certainly will be.
That's fine.
Anybody? Frank, did you have some?
Is there any federal money? I know Carpentersville received federal money for this last round that they did in Old Town. They knocked out like 240 of their services.
So there's 2 different ways to get what I'll call federal funding. There's the congressional directed funds, TIFs, earmarks, etc. Those are the ones that I mentioned that you normally have to apply for kind of annually. Your state representative or district representative would be your advocate to get those funds. There's no guarantee that you'll get them, but there's potentially an opportunity there. The other funding source that you'll hear about, and you've probably heard through US EPA advertise that we've got $15 billion that we're putting to lead service line replacements, or $5 billion just recently got allocated. That goes through state revolving funds. So that's going ultimately through that public water supply loan program. That's how those federal funds are getting to the state. There's no other avenue to get those federal funds at this time. Now, there are other federally funded grants and loan programs. I wouldn't advise them for the village. They are designed for large projects. I mean, we're talking $20 million projects. So this doesn't fit that niche. Great question. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Would you say, it sounds like there's a big trend of villages or cities coming up with a cost share plan and then switching to fully funded? Do you see that as like most of them have switched, or that's just a few that have but not that many?
I can probably name like 3 that I know right off the bat. So City of Rockford started with a cost share program. Within a year of doing that, they switched to paying 100%. The administrative efforts to chase down those private side payments weren't great. They did we'll put it on your water bill. Well, then people were paying their water bill but not paying enough for the flat fee that was applied. Do you turn off their water? Do you not? They paid their water bill, but they didn't pay the flat rate. So it became a cycle that they weren't really thrilled with. They went after funding. They're paying 100%. Village of LaGrange, we just did a water main replacement project for last year. They had 60 lead service lines on it. They had a cost share program. The homeowner was responsible for about $7,500. After going through one water main project with 60 lead service lines, the public works director is going back to his board to request the village consider paying 100% because the administrative effort to chase down those funds was really stressful. LaGrange Park ran into a similar issue where IEPA issued a temporary operating permit because they didn't get 100% participation. So they went back to the 3 homeowners that said that they couldn't afford it. They paid for those homeowners, but people communicate. You can't pay for 3 on one block and not pay for the whole street. So they ended up rebating everyone on that street and basically set a precedence in town where they're paying 100% moving forward. So kind of 3 different scenarios. I see more and more communities moving towards 100%. Now, the thing to think about is you're footing the bill up front, but at some point, like replacement still, the replacement cost still falls on the resident. You're going to have to pay that loan back with public funds. Your public funds are paid through your water rates. So people are paying for this in some way or form. It's just, are they writing a check immediately, or is it over the course of a long period of time?
Yeah, but at a local level, that argument is very thin, because we have a significant number of people who don't have this problem and a number of people that do. At this level, when you're talking about federal or you're talking about state, even at county level
Sure.
government, that argument probably holds because it dilutes as you go out. It doesn't so much with East Dundee,
Well,
because you're
I
asking
mean,
the
if you're
people at
getting
the top
into
of the hill to pay for the people at the bottom of the hill, and
Yes.
that's a direct cost. And it
when you're getting into that detail, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
We're not talking about fairness. I'm just talking about at some point the funds come from someone's paycheck. Is it a direct check to the village, or is it through their water rate? So I completely agree, and I understand what you're saying. Are you having a small portion of town pay for this in bulk, or are you distributing this against the entire community? So yes, absolutely.
okay.
I bring such great news.
Yeah, no, we really appreciate it, though. I mean, it's important, and we got to face it. But how is the question?
Yeah, well, I appreciate everyone's time. I know we went long. Thank you for bearing with me as we went through the details. If there's any other questions or concerns that come up, I am absolutely a resource.
Great.
So,
Wonderful. Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Thank
Just a couple of quick things to add too is, in the coming months, weeks, we're going to continue to determine the material service type in those 300 and some homes locations, and then continue to work on developing maybe more formal program that we'll bring back to you at some point in terms of placing the services going forward. So,
Thanks, Phil. I need to
Phil,
talk
do
to you,
you-
too.
Do you have an idea, do you have an internal deadline that you've set for yourself to have the inventory complete?
I mean, ideally, it was April of, this
Right.
past April. We're gonna, be nice to have something by the end of the summer, by the fall.
You think
Have a
that's,
complete idea.
is that realistic?
Probably not realistic, but we're gonna do the best we can to identify what those services are, and that'll give us more, it'd be nice to have that information
Yeah.
around the time that the water and sewer rate study is done, so that we can complete it, so we can all fold it all into one comprehensive discussion later this year.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I think then that will conclude our committee of the whole, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Can I ask a quick favor, just really quickly? There were some folks in the audience who spoke. Excuse me, there were some folks in the audience who spoke during the last, there are little pieces of paper on the podium. Would you mind just giving us your names so that we can have that documented? Thank you. I'll make a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Great. Do we need 5 minutes?
Yes, please.
Okay, we'll take 5, turn back here at
I need to go outside and
7:35.
take this thing off.
I need to talk to Phil.